Okay, I am beyond excited about what's next, Teju.
Right. We've got Andrea Gibson doing a keynote, and Andrea is so many things, but one of them is a poet. And we could have chosen a lot of different speakers for this opening slot, but Jordan, I'm curious why you think we're starting the day with a poet.
That's a great question. David White says that poetry is words against which we have no defense. And given that this topic is so loaded, I think a poet is exactly what we need to help us start the conversation. So I actually had the pleasure of meeting Andrea Gibson last month, and I got to tell you, not only are they one of the most celebrated and influential spoken word poets of our time, they're such a special spirit to be in the room with. I also got to tell you that Andrea's bio was written by their partner and 3 of their exes. So this is real, y'all. Andrea has changed what it means to attend a poetry show altogether. Andrea's poems
getting Andrea in the webinar.
Center around LGBTQ issues, gender, feminism, mental health, and the dismantling of oppressive social systems. And now, I'd love to brag on them a little bit. Andrea is the winner of the first Women's World Poetry Slam, and they were awarded the LGBTQ Out 100, and has been featured on BBC, NPR, and C-SPAN. If that's not impressive enough, they are the author of 7 award-winning books and 7 full-length albums. I am so honored to introduce you to the incomparable Andrea Gibson. Hi, Andrea.
Hey, am I speaking right now, y'all?
You sure are.
Oh my God. I thought it was 10:15. Okay, I'm ready.
Hey, well, we are so ready for you. And you know what? If you need a couple of seconds,
I'm
that's what
good.
we're for. Okay.
I think I'm good. So you're telling me that all the people that are here are looking at my face right now?
We're so lucky. Yes. Right.
All right, great.
Thanks so much for being with us, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you. I love that we start out in like a very raw way with me having no idea what I'm doing, which is always the best way to start.
Isn't that all of us? I mean, I feel like that is a metaphor for life.
It really is. You know, I feel like whenever I've done a live show and there's been like a massive tech problem, it's always been my best event ever. If something goes wrong, I thrive. So just because I thought this started 15 minutes from now, I think this is going to be fantastic.
Well, I'm stoked, and please, we're going to be here if you need anything. We're just like, a click of a button away, but
okay. Thank you so much.
Thank
you, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to pretend we're all in the same room together, holding hands and staring into each other's eyes and not in this virtual space, even though this is wonderful too. I'll tell you that I'm doing something tech savvy for the first time in my life. I'm reading this off the screen so I can kind of look at you. I didn't memorize my 30-minute speech. And typically I would hold paper old-fashioned style, but I'm catching up with the times. So hello, it's lovely to be in this space with you. I didn't hear all of the introduction, but I'll say that I'm a spoken word poet. I've spent much of the last 2 decades traveling around the world on tour, speaking poems about self-love, mental health, social justice, and gender. Gender has intersected at every single turn. Ever since I was a little kid, I didn't feel like I fit into the gender box. When I got older, I started explaining my gender by saying, I am happiest on the road when I'm not here or there, but in between, the yellow line running down the center of it all like a sunbeam. From early on, I gravitated towards anything that felt like it was breaking the often suffocating rules of gender. I remember being at a parade when I was just tiny, seeing men playing bagpipes while wearing kilts, which I called skirts. And when my mom told me that they were Scottish, I thought, well, I guess I'll move to Scotland when I grow up. When I was 9 years old, I attended a high school play, and I saw a high school girl on stage with a buzz cut. And I don't recall a moment in all my years where I felt my future was more possible. My goosebumps could have been their own meteor shower, seeing myself in someone creative, bold, and proud. I found out her name. I found out, this is a secret story. Well, my parents can know now, but I found out her name was Kristen. And a year later, when my baby sister was born, I convinced my parents to give my sister the middle name Kristen, though they had no idea why I liked that name so much. And to this day, still have no idea that my baby sister has the queerest name in the universe. A few years ago, and I'm having a hot flash already. I'll get to that part later of why that's happening, but I'm going to have them through this whole thing. So anybody here with hot flashes, we're together in this. A few years ago, I wrote a genderful pep talk to my younger self, which I really, really recommend doing. It can be so healing. And in it, I wrote, "You don't yet know the boys are building their confidence on stolen land. But you do worry the girls might be occupied with things you will never understand, won't ever be good at. You take one pretty step and feel like you're pouring bubbles into your own bloodbath. You don't want a soft death. You want a hard life that is your life in the locker room that doesn't stop demanding you keep your eyes on the floor. Your life at the prom, where you run home in a snowstorm, checking your last pair of heels in a snowbank, realizing you are the only boy you ever wanted to tear your dress off for. Your life, every time airport security screams pink or blue, trying to figure out what machine setting to run you through." Y'all, that was a wild day for me. They actually kept screaming it at the top of their lungs, pink or blue, pink or blue. I had no idea what they meant until they started screaming, "Are you a man or a woman? Are you a man or a woman?" And hundreds of people in the terminal turned their heads to wait for my answer. Airports are wild places. Another time in an airport, I actually had a woman grab me by the collar of my coat and try to drag me out of the women's room. And I imagine there are a lot of people listening today who have had those experiences, which are kind of sucky. I feel like everybody should always travel with a really rowdy friend beside them to do the yelling back with them. But on a more positive note, and to be clear, there are many, many positive notes about living in this gender. This ever evolving gender. I wouldn't have it any other way. I often get letters from young fans of poetry who don't know how to address me. And a few years ago, I got a letter from a very young writer, and the letter was addressed to Mr., Mrs., Dr. Gibson. I'm neither a Mr. or a Mrs. or a doctor, definitely not a doctor. But I love being called Mr., Mrs., Dr. Gibson, if y'all want to just refer to me as that for now on. Speaking of doctors, almost 2 years ago, my life changed. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and have spent most of my time since then in treatment. I usually have short hair, but not this short. And this was a diagnosis I feared my entire life. Since childhood, I had been an extreme hypochondriac, so much so that I wouldn't eat nuts on an airplane out of fear of suddenly developing a nut allergy and asphyxiating at 32,000 feet. But even more so, I feared the diagnosis because my aunt who had died of ovarian cancer, and my grandma, who I cherished, died of a broken heart not long later. Now, my grandma's name was Faye. My middle name is Faye. Faye means fairy. Andrea means masculine. So my name means masculine fairy, which is perfect. I was in my early 20s and newly out when my grandma was dying. And when I went home to visit her in her final days, I had just shaved my head, and the sight of me was absolutely shocking to everyone in my rural, working class town in the woods. But I want to I want to set us in time here. So for all we knew, Ellen was still straight. For all we knew, a man was coming to Melissa Etheridge's window. But when I walked into my grandma's hospital room, she just looked at me and smiled and said, Andrea, adding a syllable to my name to make the love last longer. And as far as I knew, my grandma hadn't been a liberal person in her lifetime. Very few people in my hometown were, but there was nothing about me that was wrong to her in that moment. She was seeing me clearly. And that was the first time in my life I started thinking about this thing I now call infinity vision, where our mortality shows us more of what's true, where we stop seeing through the filter of our biases, where our lens widens tremendously. I had always expected a cancer diagnosis would destroy my spirit. I spent decades imagining the depression that would bury me if ever I were to receive the news I received. But my diagnosis, oh, thank goodness, almost immediately did the opposite. One of the first lines I wrote about cancer was, the average person has 400 eyelashes. Chemo has taken all of mine. That's 400 wishes I wouldn't have made otherwise. Mortality, I credit mortality itself with blooming my new perspective on living, a perspective that is rich with awe and wonder and love for every living being. My therapist, who I never go a day without quoting, had told me years prior that the fact that we are all going to die is actually the seed of her bliss. And what she meant was happiness is easier to find when you know you don't have forever to find it. I loved that in theory, but failed to ground it into my being until I myself was facing the very real possibility of a shorter life and recognized I had to stop measuring my lifespan by length, but by width. And in doing so, I began to learn new ways to blow up seconds like balloons and fit infinity inside of each of them. And prior to cancer, I had a lot more pain in my life. I think because I had far less perspective. Just a few years ago, I wrote, it has been years since someone has commented on my sunny disposition. And y'all, that didn't mean I wasn't trying to juice the sun for every holy drop. No one stands by passively while their joy gets lost in the dark. I tried to get out of the dark and wrote about anxiety, panic attacks, and depression all the time. Because of that, my response to cancer was hard for people to understand. To some, it looked like I was being toxically positive. Even close friends thought my grief was in the closet. Come out, they'd say. We'll throw a pride parade for your nervous breakdown. No need to wear the straight jacket of happiness everywhere you go. But I wasn't pushing anything down to get to where I was. I don't believe we can shut ourselves off to grief without also shutting ourselves off to joy. My therapist had taught me to think of it like a kink in a hose. You stop the flow of sadness, and it's impossible to water the garden of your bliss. I think about this in a culture that is notorious for telling boys not to cry. When we do that, we are not just robbing them of their tears. We are robbing them of their happiness, their wonder, their aliveness, and their wholeness. Much of my wellness through illness has been feeling it all, staying open to every emotion that arises. The more I befriended hard emotions, the less I believed life was against me when it brought challenges. I began to see the challenges themselves as God. And in that I suddenly had a heart that knew how to break into laughter. For example, early on in treatment, my partner and I were having sex, and I was completely bald from chemo. And in a really heated moment, I whispered, "Run your fingers through my hair." So these past 2 years have been full of moments like that. And also moments of tears, many moments of tears, even as I talk about, almost always when I'm talking about the most beautiful stuff or the most hopeful is when I get weepy, which is why I'm going to feel weepy through this entire talk today. And all of this is in a lot of ways to say, sometimes darkness lights the way. I didn't need rose-colored glasses to begin to see the astounding beauty of this world. I simply had to stop ignoring the thorns loving heart. And besides, y'all, what kind of poet would I be if I could only make hard things beautiful on paper? So today, as I talk about gender, I want to share some of what I've learned about gender as I have experienced it in relation to mortality. And one of the first people who comes up for me whenever I think about this intersection is trans activist Leslie Feinberg, who said, "Gender is the poetry each of us makes with the language we've been taught." It's a beautiful quote because it tells us that the more language we have, the more we understand who we are. As a poet writing about gender, I never come to the page to write down what I know about myself. I come to the page to find out who I am. And I am surprised all the time. For example, through writing, I realized that I had never actually kissed any boys in my youth. My tongue had just been punching their tongues. Through writing, I learned that my first buzz cut helped me feel softer as a human being. I looked in the mirror and my tuft relaxed. My body so at ease. I could no longer hold my tears back. I describe it by saying, I cut my hair and I grew out my feelings instead. Also through writing, I realized that I didn't want my parents to use they, them pronouns for me. I wanted to be their little girl, and not because they had trouble understanding non-binary identities, though they did, but because every time they called me their little girl, so much love lived in those words. I cherished it and never, ever wanted to stop hearing it. And I share this because I think it's super important to tap into our individual truths in that way, to never expect to want what other people want, to not believe that there is a script for how to do our gender right. We won't all feel celebrated by the same things, and we won't all feel disheartened by the same things. Leslie Feinberg was sick for a long time with chronic Lyme disease before eventually dying of it, and spoke about pronouns becoming less important at the end because they were having experiences of being treated poorly by people who were getting the language exactly right. People who were highly educated on gender issues, who had PhDs and not being problematic, but they were having experiences of being treated with enormous love and compassion by folks who were constantly misgendering Leslie simply because they were not informed on the issue. Early on in treatment, I learned what Leslie was talking about. I was on a walk one day with my partner, and it was right in the middle of chemo. And I had put a ton of effort before the walk into trying to not look sick. I had a new snazzy hat, and my partner had put blush on me, which we called boy blush. in hopes of helping me look like I had some red blood cells. But in spite of my efforts that day while on the walk, a stranger stopped us and asked if she could pray for me. That was something that would have really put me off in the past. But for some reason, I felt open to it. And y'all, I'll tell you, the prayer was full of things that would have historically offended me. But all I could feel was this woman's heart and her kindness, her offering something to a stranger that she hoped would help. The capacity to feel the loving intention beneath someone's uninformed language is something I now feel blessed to have learned these past years, because I walk through the world feeling far more peace. My parents really didn't understand my queerness until my diagnosis. Coming out to them about my sexuality at 21 years old or 20 years old was hard because they were very afraid for me. I told my mom, and she looked at me like I was walking backwards down a wedding aisle towards an utterly unsurvivable cliff. And they couldn't imagine me being gay and happy at the same time, though the word gay literally means happy. They struggled to understand my queerness until I was diagnosed. They flew to Colorado to be with me for my surgery. On that trip, my folks met all of my friends for the first time, all of them queer, and fell in love with all of them. They met my godson, who has 2 moms, and my godson is 4 years old, and he calls me Ankle because it's a mix between aunt and uncle, and my parents started calling me Ankle as well. But coming out to them in my 20s had been really hard. And at that time, I saw a therapist who said, "You are not responsible for your family's happiness." And I remember that resonating with me on an intellectual level, but it was hard on a heart level, specifically because my folks were so generous. They cared for people's happiness as much as their own. My father's father was an alcoholic and was abusive to my grandma. And my grandma had told me that my dad stayed home most weekends of high school to keep my grandpa from hurting her. She said she'd tell him to go to the movies and he'd say he didn't like the movie. She'd say, go to the dance, and he'd say he didn't like dancing. And my father wouldn't want me to share this. He wouldn't think that people should get a trophy for doing something he would think anyone with a heart would have done. And this is the kind of person I knew both my parents to be. And I grew up respecting that about them. So it took me some time to let the "you are not responsible for your family's happiness" advice to sink in. And even after it sunk in, it took me another decade to be able to understand that being myself is always, always a generosity to others. And let me clarify what I mean by that. A few years ago, my friend Ethel said something that I think is incredible advice to give to anyone who is coming out about their gender or sexuality. She said, "You will never make anyone's life better by agreeing to not be yourself, even if it may seem so from the outside. Every soul in the universe is invested in every other soul living in line with their truth. So to be you is not just a gift to your own life, but a gift to those who mistakenly believe their lives would be better if you would agree to be someone other than who you are." I love that advice. I think about it all the time, and I think it's amazing advice to give to youth. I think, let me take a little sip here with my Dolly Parton mug. So I think that clarity, I think it naturally finds us at the end of our lives, but it's easy to feel how it could transform a young person's world if they were to hear it early on. And another story to reiterate the point. So One night around 3 a.m., I woke up terrified to die. It's almost like something happens at 3 a.m. where I'll wake up and have a fear of dying. And usually around 3 a.m. every night, I go on YouTube and I start Googling death. I don't know if anybody else does that for fun, but I just start Googling death. And I discovered a young man named I think you say his name, Matthias Di Stefano, who remembers all of his past lives, which, listen, y'all, I know is going to be a stretch for some of you to believe, not just a stretch, but a whole yoga retreat. Think of it as a metaphor if you need to. But when I started listening to him, I actually believed him. And he was talking about, I just think this is fascinating. He was talking about how in every life he lived, on every planet he lived, there were trans people. But then he went on to say something that made me realize how narrow my lens was on the issue, how I have to think bigger, and how I have to think specifically beyond my lifespan in regards to any social justice issue. Matthias spoke to the divide in our world around trans rights and the potency of this moment in history right now, saying we are shifting something vital. And that is, instead of telling our children who they are, we are finally beginning to ask them to tell us who they are. When we ask youth to tell us their gender, their pronouns, when we say your name is a gift, you can return if it doesn't fit, that has enormous evolutionary impact that goes far beyond gender. Asking people who they are is inviting all people to think about their own being like an inventor, to be that creative, that expansive in their own becoming. And that doesn't only positively impact trans and non-binary youth, it impacts everyone. It sends the message that whoever you are, you get to create your own unique self. And when I feel into that, I just imagine how that would alter our world long term. Imagine how much easier it will be to create a new world if that world is full of people who created themselves from scratch, who did not follow a cookie cutter recipe for their own becoming. It's really exciting to think about it. It was fascinating for me to be invited to this talk at this time, because I spent my whole life of feeling genderful, playing with gender and just genderful Andrea all over the place. But right after I was diagnosed, something shifted, and I noticed I instead of feeling genderful, I was feeling something I described closer to genderless. This was a result, I think, in building a more intimate relationship with a part of me that is eternal, the me who will survive my body. And that, I know, is a genderless me. I've always valued conversations about seeing people in their full humanity, but it hit me that to see someone in their full humanity isn't actually seeing them in full. We are infinite beings having a brief human experience. That means we are having brief experiences with gender as well. In an ideal world, that brevity would be a catalyst for having fun with gender, celebrating the endless creative ways an individual might paint the canvas of who they are. In an ideal world, no one would ever think about tearing the brush out of someone's hand. What does feel eternal to me, and this is the part that I keep thinking about, what does feel eternal to me is the masculine and feminine energies within us all. My friend gave me a new perspective on this one day when she said to me, she said, Andrea, the night is feminine. Walk into the night and see how everything is one in the darkness. how you can spot no separation between anything and anything else. In the night, you cannot tell two people apart. Everything is a single color, unified. The feminine is the eternal part of us that is connected to everything in existence. But the daylight, my friend says, is masculine. The sun rises and shows us how different we are, how we are individuals, uniquely wonderful, uniquely divine, distinctly ourselves. We each contain the eternal masculine and feminine, and that is the innate knowing that we are like no one else, but we are connected to every little living being in the universe. I hadn't had any understanding of how connected we all are until my diagnosis. I spent a lot of my life thinking I was singing a solo, but my diagnosis taught me that we are always, always singing a harmony with others. For example, I lost all my body hair to chemotherapy, every single hair in my body, except for my eyebrows. I had no idea why they were sticking around and hadn't mentioned it to anyone. And then one day, this might make me cry. But then one day, my mom called me out of the blue and told me that my father had woken up on the other side of the country with his entire right eyebrow missing. And it has been gone ever since, as I've been through treatment this whole time. And that's how connected we are. I don't know what science that is, but it's the science of love somewhere. And that's our connection. And I think it's almost as if our lifelines are braided. And I know it doesn't always feel like our lifelines are braided. I think a lot of us are in tune with the enormous divide in the US right now and in the world around trans rights. In the US, it looks like we've got half the country advocating for trans rights and half the country pretty transphobic. And I think the word transphobic is really important to use, because I know there are a lot of people who genuinely hate a transness. I don't want to in any way ignore the horrific violence trans people are having to endure every single day. But I think far more people are simply afraid of transness. And when it's fear, it's important for us to acknowledge that, because hate is the end of a conversation. Fear isn't. Fear invites the question, what are you afraid of? And then people have the opportunity to look within themselves for that answer. But while we're in this chaos is a sort of light word for it, I want to talk about something I heard Pema Chodron say long ago. And she said, if you want to keep your feet from hurting, you can do one of two things. You can cover the entire world with leather, or you can make yourself some leather shoes. And prior to my diagnosis, as an activist and as an artist, I think I was trying to cover the entire world with leather to make the world a safer place for myself and my queer community. Now I better understand the importance of making shoes, building communities where we teach each other inner resilience so we aren't wrecked by the world at the same time, doing these things at the same time. So it's not about not being activists. It's about doing both. It's crucial to do both, excuse me, because the planet has a lot of hurt in it, which means it has a lot of cruelty in it. And we can't wait for that cruelty to be gone, to gift ourselves as much wellness as possible. We have to believe, that's one thing that I've definitely learned this year. We have to believe in our capacity to do this life, no matter what this life looks like, to believe in our power, our light, and our strength. I heard this years ago. When a butterfly works to make its way out of the cocoon to fly for the first time, it can be really challenging. It can be a struggle. And often humans will see this and try to help the butterfly out by peeling away the cocoon. But the butterfly's struggle is crucial to its chances of surviving. Without that struggle, the butterfly is far less likely to thrive. I think about this all the time when I'm naming a challenge in someone's life a purely awful thing, or when I'm looking to someone else in my life to do my cocoon peeling for me. Community is vital. Support is vital. Having each other's backs is vital. So is trusting individuals with their own becoming. Many years ago, I wrote, I said to the sun, tell me about the Big Bang. The sun said, it hurts to become. Sometimes it hurts to become who we are, but it is always, always worth it. So I'm going to close here with a poem I wrote. And this poem is called, I'm going to take off my, I'm going to delayer, like, you know, I'm in a big rock concert, costume change for this one, y'all. This one sometimes tends to make me sweat out my eyes, which I've heard has otherwise been called crying. Okay. This is called Maga Hat in the Chemo Room. There is a man wearing a Maga hat in a chemo room. I can't get a good look at him because my body is plugged into beeping machines, but my partner just tore the headphones out of my ears to say, can you believe there was a man wearing a Maga hat in here? I misplaced a medical marijuana edible around 3 a.m. last night and couldn't find it till I woke up, chugged a glass of water beside my bed, and the water tasted weird. So I'm relaxed in public for the first time in my entire life. My thoughts are snuggled between stacks of jelly donut pancakes. I am right now pouring syrup over my frontal lobe, which is to say I'm chill today, chill and terribly, terribly, terribly disturbed. Who wears a Trump hat to chemotherapy? Why didn't this guy get the memo? I got the one that said, don't wear political attire to chemo. Who sent me that memo? I sent it to myself. Why did I do that? I have no idea. Every article of clothing I own rocks a political slogan. March for our lives, rest in peace, patriarchy, queerdo. My own sister makes hats with an E crossed out of the word hate to spell simply hat, and I'm not even wearing that. Like, don't hate people is suddenly too edgy of a statement for me to make. Have I become a coward? Did my radical hysterectomy make me less radical? Has facing my own mortality robbed me of my politics? Please tell me I'm not becoming one of those can't we all just get along people? The ones I absolutely blame for the fact that no one can get along. I see a Trump hat and think, when that person dies, he's not going to be a ghost, he's going to be a white sheep. I see a Trump hat and think, when I die, dude's going to show up to my funeral waving a God hates queers sign at my family's tears. That is, if he knows I'm queer. I suppose there's a chance he thinks I'm straight, that I'm bald now, but in a healthier year, I'm rocking a blonde bob with face framing highlights, that I'm a mascara model who's only temporarily used up my wishes, that I'm wearing this blush to sun-kiss my already peachy cheeks, and not because my red blood cells have been devoured by radioactive vampires and I look dead without it. Who wears a Trump hat to chemotherapy? Is Trump even allowed to tweet? Pigeons have more permission to lead the country. In the chair closest to mine, there is another man who isn't wearing a hat, but who I guess is a Trump voter because he just mentioned to the nurse that he has a few Mercedes. I know there were Democrats who have a few Mercedes. I just guess they mention it less in rooms full of strangers fighting for their lives. The first rule of being a rich liberal, act like you don't have money. Be so down to earth, you're actually dirty. No one can pull that look off except Bernie. Everyone can see Bernie is genuinely into conserving water. Me too. This hairdo is an environmental decision, a sacrifice I made for Mother Earth, because something to know about me. I am convicted in my convictions. I believe in my beliefs. I have very strong opinions about my very strong opinions, so strong that if you say I can't take my politics to the afterlife with me, I'll say, well, that's not true, because my politics aren't my politics. My politics are my soul, and I'm not going anywhere without my soul, and that guy's politics aren't his soul. I don't think souls have machine gun collections. That guy's politics are more like his incisors or his hangnails or his spit. I want to tell him, you can't take your spit to the afterlife with you, not even to hell, but He doesn't think he's going to hell. He thinks I am. He doesn't know I'm going to go to heaven just to see Jesus standing outside the pearly gates with a sign that says, gaze not welcome, and God in the clouds above him laughing like an ethereal sixth grader saying, we're just kidding. We're just kidding. Look, we made the pearly gates rainbow for you. Look, we made chips and hummus. Oh my God. How'd you know that queers love chips and hummus? Because I'm God. Oh my God. Is it true you're letting all the non-binary people in first? Yes. Oh my God. That's why you call it the Holy Trinity and not the Holy Binary, isn't it? Here's what's true. Here's what's true. I don't wear political attire to chemo because I desperately want this room to be a country where no one looks at me and identifies me as their enemy. I want to feel what I rarely feel outside of here, that everyone is rooting for me to survive, even Maga Hat guy. I want him to want me to live so long I could walk over to him right now, tell him I had to have my ovaries removed, and he'd be so kind. He'd say, Andrea, you can absolutely have one of mine. Here, just have it. There is a land that free somewhere. We just think believing in it is a child's prayer, something you only let yourself want when you don't yet know this world. But if that land can exist in this room where everyone is being told they could die soon, how will it ever happen out there where everyone thinks they have so much time to kill, to slaughter? Mercedes guy has a daughter who loves him. I can see it in his eyes. And Maga Hat man has an angst inside him I recognize from all the times I had a pain so deep I thought peace was shallow and blame was the only way to dig it out. That kind of digging, it hurts like hell. It's the opposite of living, hoarding ideas that is so wrong. They chase the soul out of the body that believes them. When you're there, you think you know everything and you can't be convinced you don't. Something I don't know right now. I don't know. I'm going to keep coming here week after week. I'm going to keep seeing these guys week after week, and then one week I won't. Their chairs will be empty, and I'll have no words for the feelings inside of me. I'll only have tears that I will struggle and struggle to explain to anyone outside of this place, because everything in my politics knows the middle ground is where this earth will go to die. But when anyone in this room leaves this world, part of me does too. I feel it in every cell of me now, that I am not a me. I am one eyelash on the eyes of humanity, holding on for dear, dear life, trying to get the eyelashes beside me to look in the right direction before we are all wiped off the face of this planet that desperately wants us to live of natural causes like kindness, like caring, like knowing these bodies are clothes we are all growing out of so quickly, until one day we will be only souls who can see we always wanted the exact same wish to come true. I know we will all know that after we leave this world. The planet is just so desperate for us to know it now too. Thank you, everyone.
Wow. Andrea, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
I'm just going to give it a second. Just a moment to soak that in. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am not often speechless, but this is one of those moments. I'm so grateful for the time that you shared with us, and for the heart and the soul that you bore in this room in front of us all and invited us to bear ours alongside you. I have a little bit of a cold, and you know, when you have a cold and then you experience emotions and then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't cry because I'm going to be snotty on the screen, and like the cold, it's going to make the cold worse. But I feel so much. So thank you for sharing and inviting us all into those feelings. I think one thing I want to share is that I resonate so deeply, which I imagine so many of us do. I won't even say especially queer folks, but I imagine so many of us resonate deeply with those fractured relationships we have with family or past friends before we come out, and then we come out and there's like a bit of a disconnect, and then that reconciliation sometimes takes us into our new being. And it was beautiful to hear you share that. And I am going through that process right now, and I think it's such a great way to kick off this day for the summit, Engendering Love. I'm just so grateful for this message. I honestly don't know what else to say. So thank you again, Andrea, for being here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was extraordinary. Can I ask, is there a name for this poem that you just shared with us? Maybe we could look it up and sit with the words there more.
Yes, it's called Maga Hat in the Chemo Room, and I think it's up on YouTube somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I love that invocation at the end. There is a land that free somewhere. We just think believing in it is a child's prayer. And then something about how if we don't believe in it, how will we ever find the time to build it? And just, my goodness, thank you for giving us the courage to dream in that line and wish for this land. And I'm just curious, really quick, to ask you, how do you sustain that childlike prayer in yourself?
I don't know if I sustained it. I don't know if I was living with it until my diagnosis, but there is something about the freshness with which I see the world now. It's, I I can't imagine the way I walk through the world with awe these days. I imagine I hadn't felt that since I was a child. And so there feels like there's a lot of new childlike, I feel very childlike these years. And so I think that's part of it.
Okay. I wish that we could spend 20 hours chatting with you, Andrea.
And I'm so glad that we made the mistake of starting early, so we had more time with you.
That was actually our fault.
That was our fault.
It was our fault.
It was. Oh, good.
Yes.
It wasn't you. No. That was us.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you again, Andrea, for being here with us.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Engendering Love, it's time for us to move on. And the next thing that we have is our trans non-binary panel. So we're going to invite Yossi up with us, the co-facilitator and founder of Engendering Love. Hi, Yossi.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Teju. Before we move, I don't know if Andrea could still hear me, but I do want to say that you gave my soul a deep workout, and my eyes are wanting to sweat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just feel teary and moved. So that was a good workout, and that I love that sweat.
Yeah.
It cleanses the soul.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew, just stay with us the rest of the day, okay? Just stay with us.
This is for hours, just all.
Yeah. So we put the link to the poem in the chat, so everyone can access that. All right, Andrew, we'll say ta-ta for now. Hope to see you again soon.
See you, y'all. Thank you.